Welcome to our new episode. We are going to start our first story, and the story is about the night shift at Blackwood Warehouse. I never liked working the night shift, but when bills pile up, you don't have a choice. Blackwood Warehouse was just outside town, surrounded by miles of empty road and thick forest. It had a reputation, not because of anything illegal, but because no one ever stuck around for long. Employees quit after just a few weeks. Some didn't even return after their first shift. But when they posted an opening for a security guard, the pay was too good to ignore. I told myself the stories were just exaggerations. Paranormal nonsense. Workers love to make up ghost stories, especially in a place as isolated as this. My job was simple. Monitor the security cameras, patrol the storage sections, and make sure no one broke in. Easy money. Or so I thought. The warehouse was massive, about the size of 3 football fields, stacked with rows of towering metal shelves filled with boxes. Most were labeled for shipping, but others had no markings. My boss, Mr. Carlson, told me not to worry about those. Just do your rounds, stay alert, and call me if anything weird happens, he had said with an odd look. Weird? What kind of weird? I didn't ask. I should have. By 11:45 p.m., I was alone. The last of the workers had clocked out, leaving the building eerily silent. The only sounds were the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of metal from the temperature shifts. I sat in the security office, watching the camera feeds. Nothing but rows of boxes and empty hallways. At midnight, I did my first patrol. Flashlight in hand, I walked through the aisles. The air was oddly cold, and my footsteps echoed strangely, like the walls were swallowing the sound. That's when I noticed it. A box in section 17 was open. The tape had been torn off, the flaps slightly parted. I moved closer, expecting to see misplaced inventory, but what I found sent a chill down my spine. Inside was an old stuffed bear, its fur matted and stained. But that wasn't the worst part. Its glass eyes were missing, and its mouth had been stitched shut with thick black thread. I took a step back, heart pounding. Why would a warehouse stock something like this? I reached for my radio to report it, when a loud bang echoed through the building. It came from the far end of the warehouse. I whipped my head around, scanning the aisles. Nothing. Just rows of silent, towering shelves. Then my radio crackled. But I hadn't pressed the button. A faint voice whispered through the static. "Help me." The whisper on the radio sent a jolt of cold terror through my veins. I stared at the device in my hand and my grip tightening around it. "Who's there?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. Static. Nothing else. I turned back toward the open box with the eyeless stuffed bear. A sharp metallic clink echoed behind me, like something had been knocked over. My flashlight beam swept across the towering shelves, illuminating only dust and shadows. I had 2 choices: walk away and pretend nothing happened, or check it out like an idiot in every horror movie ever. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound. The warehouse felt different now. The air was heavy, thick with something I couldn't describe. My footsteps sounded muffled, as if the walls were absorbing them. I rounded the corner into section 19, my flashlight beam landing on a stack of fallen boxes. One of them was moving. I froze. The flaps twitched, shifting slightly as if something inside was trying to push its way out. Then a whisper, so close it felt like it was just behind my ear. "Don't open it." I spun around, heart hammering, but the aisle was empty. Screw this. I backed away, radio shaking in my hand. I needed to call Carlson. This was beyond weird. But just as I pressed the button, all the lights cut out. The warehouse plunged into absolute darkness, and then footsteps. slow, deliberate, coming from the far end of the aisle. I lifted my flashlight, the beam shaking as I pointed it ahead. The footsteps stopped. I swept the light across the aisle. Nothing, but I could feel it. Something was watching me. Then my radio crackled again, and this time, the whisper was clearer. "It knows you're here." A deep, rattling breath sounded from the darkness ahead. I wasn't alone. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs locked in place. My flashlight flickered just for a second, but in that instant, I saw something at the far end of the aisle. A figure. Tall, unnaturally thin. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an impossible angle. It stood in the shadows just beyond the reach of my light. Then it moved. A quick, jerking motion. Too fast. Too unnatural. It ducked behind the shelves before I could get a proper look. I forced myself to breathe, gripping the radio so hard that my knuckles turned white. "Carlson," I whispered, trying not to let my voice shake. "There's something in here with me." Static. Then laughter. Not from the radio. From the shelves. A deep, guttural chuckle, distorted and wrong, echoing through the metal aisles. I turned and ran. I sprinted toward the security office, my footsteps slamming against the cold concrete. The laughter followed me, bouncing off the walls, getting closer. I slammed into the security room, locking the door behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps. I checked the monitors, frantically searching the cameras for any sign of that thing. Then I saw it. Camera 6. The screen showed the entrance of the warehouse. The tall figure stood just outside the glow of the emergency lights, facing the camera. Its head twitched violently from side to side. Then, as I watched in horror, it lifted a hand and waved. I couldn't stay here. That thing knew exactly where I was. I grabbed the only weapon I could find, a rusted crowbar from under the desk, and forced myself to move. My car was in the parking lot. If I could make it outside, I could drive the hell away from here. I unlocked the door, stepped out, and immediately stopped. The warehouse was silent. No footsteps, no laughter, just cold, suffocating stillness. I moved slowly, my flashlight beam sweeping across the towering shelves. Every shadow felt wrong, stretching unnaturally, shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. Then I heard it. A scraping sound. Metal against metal. I turned towards section 22, where the shelves had collapsed earlier. The boxes were gone. And in their place, a doorway. A gaping black void where there shouldn't have been one. Something was inside. I could feel it. Watching. Waiting. A single thought pounded in my mind. This isn't just a warehouse. I turned and bolted for the exit, but the door was already open, and standing just outside was me. I skidded to a stop, my breath catching in my throat. The figure outside the door was identical to me. Same uniform, same flashlight, same crowbar in its trembling hand. But its face, it was all wrong. The eyes were too wide. The mouth was stretched into an unnatural grin, teeth far too sharp. Then, in a voice that was my own, it whispered, "You took too long." And the lights went out again. I don't remember much after that. Just running. The cold air biting my skin. The feeling of something chasing me. The warehouse stretching into a maze, shifting and twisting until I had no idea where I was. And then I woke up. Back in the security office. The monitors were blank. The clock read 12:01 a.m., as if no time had passed. The warehouse was silent. No signs of the collapsed shelves, no open boxes, no thing. Had I imagined it all? Then I saw the security footage. Camera 6. A dark figure stood at the entrance, staring at the camera, watching, waiting. And just before the screen cut to static, it lifted a hand and waved. I quit the next day. Never went back. Never spoke to Carlson. But sometimes late at night, when I check my phone, there's a missed call from an unknown number. And when I listen to the voicemail, all I hear is laughter. Okay, this is the end of the story. Now, we are going to start our second story. And the second story is about the night shift at Ravenwood Morgue. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. I mean, I enjoyed horror stories, like anyone else. But I always thought they were just that. Stories. Then I took a job as a night shift assistant at Ravenwood Morgue. It wasn't my dream job, but the pay was great, and I figured it would be quiet. All I had to do was log incoming cases, clean up after the embalming process, and make sure no one unauthorized got in. Simple. But by my third night, I realized something was very, very wrong. At around 2 a.m., I was finishing up my rounds. The air in the morgue was heavy with the scent of disinfectant and something else, something rotten. The refrigeration units hummed softly, a steady, almost comforting sound. Then the lights flickered. I sighed, muttering under my breath. Probably just a power surge. But then a single drawer slid open. I stopped. The long metal autopsy drawer, the kind used to store bodies, had moved on its own. At first I thought maybe it wasn't shut properly. Maybe the old morgue had uneven flooring. I swallowed, stepping closer. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle. The name tag on the drawer read, "Unknown female found in woods." I hesitated. My radio crackled to life on my belt, making me jump. Then through the static, a voice whispered, "She's not supposed to be here." I spun around, heart pounding. The morgue was empty. And when I turned back, the drawer was closed again. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. Lack of sleep does weird things to your head. But the feeling of being watched stayed with me. At 3:30 a.m., I sat at the front desk, filling out some paperwork. That's when I heard it. A soft knock. Not from the entrance. From inside the morgue. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the sound. It led me to the freezer room, where the older bodies were stored before burial. The knocking continued, steady, insistent. I stepped inside, my breath visible in the frigid air. One of the freezer doors was shaking. Something or someone was inside. I should have called the cops. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I unlocked the latch and pulled the door open. A body lay on the metal shelf, covered by a white sheet. It wasn't moving. Then the lights flickered again. And in that brief second of darkness, I heard a deep, wet breath. The sheet sank inward like something beneath it had just inhaled. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking. The cold seeped into my bones, but I couldn't look away. Then slowly, the sheet began to rise, like someone was sitting up. I slammed the freezer door shut and locked it. My breathing was ragged, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then, just as I turned to run, a handprint appeared on the frosted glass window of the door, from the inside. I didn't know what to do. My rational brain screamed that there was a logical explanation. Maybe someone had made a mistake, stored a patient who wasn't actually dead. But that voice on the radio, and the name tag on the first drawer, I needed answers. I hurried back to the desk and checked the logs. The body in the freezer was listed as Mark Harris. Died of cardiac arrest. I scrolled further down. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Mark Harris had already been transferred. His body wasn't supposed to be here anymore. Then who the hell was in the freezer? I reached for my radio with a shaking hand, but before I could speak, the radio crackled to life on its own. A distorted voice whispered, "That's not his name." And then every single autopsy drawer slid open at once. The sound was deafening, metal clanging, drawers screeching as they slid out on their own. Cold air rushed from inside them, bringing with it a smell of old death. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering. The room felt wrong. Then I saw them. The bodies were sitting up them. Not moving like the living, but jerking, twitching. Their heads lolled at unnatural angles, their mouths hanging open in silent screams. I turned and ran. I sprinted through the dark hallway, my breath ragged, my mind screaming for an exit. But when I reached the door, it wasn't there. Just a blank wall. I turned back. The bodies were standing now, their empty eyes fixed on me. And then, in perfect unison, they whispered my name. I closed my eyes, my mind racing. This isn't real. This isn't real. But when I opened them, I was somewhere else. The morgue was gone. I was standing in a forest. The trees loomed above me, their gnarled branches twisting like grasping hands. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. And at my feet, a shallow grave. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I could see something half buried in the dirt. Fabric. A white sheet. A dead body. No? My dead body? I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I turned and saw a figure approaching. Tall, shadowed. Its face was hidden, but its voice was mine. You were never supposed to leave. I woke up at my desk, gasping for air. The morgue was quiet. The autopsy drawers were closed. The lights were steady. Had I imagined it? I glanced at the clock. 2 a.m. Exactly where I had started. The same moment from before. The radio crackled. Then, in a perfect copy of my own voice, it whispered, "It's your turn now." And the freezer door slowly opened. Okay, this is the end of our second story. Now we are going to start our third and last story. And the story is about the night shift at Evergreen Asylum. I should have known something was off the moment I stepped inside Evergreen Asylum. The job offer had been random, too good to be true. A night shift security position with triple pay for watching over an abandoned mental hospital that was being converted into a historical site. The only requirement? Don't leave before morning. I didn't ask questions. I needed the money. The place had been shut down for years, sitting on the outskirts of the town like a forgotten nightmare. The halls were long, stretching into dark voids, and the walls were covered in peeling paint that made it look like the building itself was rotting. I met my supervisor, Franklin, a quiet guy in his late 50s. He handed me an old walkie-talkie and a set of keys. "This place is old," he muttered. "Weird things happen, but don't let it get to you." That was all he said before leaving. I should have walked away. I didn't. The first few hours were uneventful. I did my rounds, checking the main hall, the old patient rooms, and the observation wing. Everything was silent except for the occasional creak of the building settling. Then at 1:13 a.m., my walkie crackled to life. Static. Then a voice, distant, whispering. "Help me." My stomach tightened. "Franklin?" I asked, gripping the radio. Silence. I brushed it off. Maybe I was just hearing interference. Then as I turned the corner near the old solitary confinement cells, my flashlight flickered and a shadow moved. A tall, hunched figure stood at the far end of the hallway, just past the flickering emergency light. It didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just stood there. I blinked, and it was gone. By 2 a.m., the temperature had dropped. My breath was visible in the air even though the heater was running. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were coming from the 3rd floor. The floor that had been completely sealed off. I grabbed my flashlight and the master key, my heart hammering. The old staircase creaked under my weight as I climbed up, my flashlight struggling against the thick darkness. At the top, the hallway stretched ahead, lined with rusted metal doors. These were the rooms for violent patients. Then I noticed something. One of the doors was open. The only door on the entire floor that wasn't chained shut. Inside was an old patient bed, the restraints still attached, and on the wall scratch marks. Deep, jagged gashes covered the concrete, as if someone had clawed at it from the inside. Then behind me, a whisper. I spun around. No one was there. Then my walkie crackled again, and this time, the whispering voice wasn't asking for help. It was laughing. I ran back down, locking the door behind me. Back in the security office, I decided to check the old security footage. There were still some tapes left from years ago, back when the asylum was running. I popped in a tape labeled Patient 37 and hit play. The footage was grainy, black and white. It showed a woman sitting in a wheelchair, her back hunched, her long, stringy hair covering her face. A doctor stood in front of her, holding a clipboard. "Tell me your name," the doctor asked. The woman didn't answer. The doctor tried again. "Who are you?" The woman slowly lifted her head. That's when I realized she was looking directly into the camera, as if she could see me. I leaned in, my pulse spiking. Then in a soft, broken whisper, she spoke. "I see you." The screen glitched. The room around me went ice cold. And then something knocked on the security office door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. I grabbed my flashlight, heart hammering, and stood up. The knocking stopped. I reached for the door handle and hesitated. Then slam. The door burst open on its own. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering. The hallway outside was pitch black. I stepped out, my breath shaky. The silence was thick, suffocating. Then my walkie-talkie crackled again. A voice whispered, "You shouldn't have watched." Suddenly, the emergency lights shut off, and down the hallway a figure stood at the far end. The woman from the tape. Her head tilted. Then she screamed. The sound was inhuman, a mix of static and pure rage. I ran. I sprinted down the hall, my legs burning. The door at the end led to the basement archives. I shoved it open and slammed it shut behind me. It was dark. The smell of mold and old paper filled my nose. Then a single light bulb flickered on. In the dim light, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Patient files. Scattered across the floor as if someone had gone through them recently. And then I saw my name. My hands trembled as I picked up the file. The pages were old, yellowed. But the picture stapled to it, it was me. My own face staring back. But the date on the file was from 30 years ago. Then written in shaky handwriting, Patient 37, do not release. I dropped the file. My breathing was ragged. Then a deep, distorted laugh filled the basement. The same laugh from the walkie-talkie. And from the darkness. Something moved. I ran, but there was nowhere to go. The walls seemed to shift, twisting into narrow corridors that hadn't been there before. Then up ahead, a mirror. Old, dusty, cracked. I stumbled toward it, desperate for some sense of reality. And then I saw myself. But my reflection was smiling. A slow, twisted grin. Then in my own voice it whispered, "You were never meant to leave." I screamed, and everything went black. I woke up in the security office. The clock read 11:59 p.m., like the night had reset. My radio crackled. A voice whispered, "It's your turn now." I looked at the security monitors, and in the flickering screen, I saw the woman from the tape. She was standing right behind me. I turned, the lights went out, and this time, they didn't come back on. Okay, our today's episode is end for now. See you in the next episode. And if you guys enjoyed our story, then subscribe our channel and hit the bell icon and like the video, and obviously share this video with your friends and family members who is Ghost Lover. Thank you.